If I were to ask you to vaguely describe to me one of the games from the Halo trilogy, what would you say? I imagine it'd go something like this. You play as a soldier in a galactic war against an alien army. You will spend a majority of the gameplay wiping away waves of enemies with weapons you pick up as you go, occasionally hopping into a vehicle to take on larger threats, some on the ground, some in the air. Each game will feature set pieces across a variety of interesting environments, have multiplayer modes seamlessly hop between intense competition and goofy fun, and feature a soundtrack so divine it makes anyone listening to them violently combust from the sheer power of their chords. Combine all of this with a grandiose story, cheesy one-liners, and an alien entity capable of taking control of all life in the galaxy, and you have everything you need to put together a fun, engaging, and interesting sequel to Star Fox.
Wait a minute, something ain't right.
This is Star Fox Assault, and this is Halo. One is gritty, violent, and known best for its dynamic sandbox of enemies, weapons, and vehicles. The other is an on-rails shooter best described as Star Wars with furries. Outside of sci-fi and a penchant for blue women, these two franchises should have nothing in common between each other. And yet, here I am, playing a Star Fox game with a wide array of enemies, weapons, and vehicles, with 4-player split screen where we fight for power weapons and vehicles across an open map. Look familiar? But when you see Star Fox mentioned today, this entry into the series is left out of the timeline.
Where was Assault in there?
Acknowledge Assault! Oh no! Oh, you!
Why don't you want to acknowledge Assault? It's literally your best one. It's literally the perfect formula.
What's happened? Hi, I'm MooreOver, and today I am sitting down to perform an autopsy on a game that I believe is one of the most fascinating in Nintendo's history. One that sought to redefine the series it was a part of, and in doing so, became one of the reasons that Star Fox disappeared for a decade. This is the story of that time Nintendo made a Halo game.
Do a barrel roll!
It's hard not to start a video about Star Fox without talking about Star Fox 64. It is the game that most would point to if you would ask them what Star Fox is. That or Glenn Powell. It took the original release of Star Fox and revamped it with full 3D visuals, a voiced cast, tons of new levels, 2 additional vehicles, and showcasing that a rail shooter didn't need to be only on the rails with the all-range mode. These improvements to the original game had placed the series alongside Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time as the games of the 64 generation. When a franchise reaches a level like this, where a title in its series becomes the thing people identify it with, you've reached a point where your franchise has been given a formula, a style and presentation that players expect to see when a new release comes on the shelves. This is a huge boon for most franchises, since it makes any subsequent release easy to sell to fans of the series. You liked Super Mario 64? Here's more of 64, with a different flavor. But this boon comes with a trade-off. Having a definitive formula makes it so any variation from that formula becomes far harder to sell to both existing fans and new audiences. If a developer wants to move the franchise to a new style, or worse, genre, then their execution of that change must be so seamless that the move away from the original formula is hardly felt. But the team at Star Fox, including lead Shigeru Miyamoto and lead artist Takaya Imamura, were not quite satisfied with the formula they had created. Immediately after 64, the team had already started experimenting with the idea of a 3D action-adventure game in the Star Fox franchise. And no, that idea was not Star Fox Adventures. The story of Star Fox Adventures goes roughly like this. Rareware, developing their last game for the N64, were presenting their work to Shigeru Miyamoto. This game was called Dinosaur Planet, and Miyamoto took note of the cartoonish animal characters featured in the game and said to Rare's leads, "We should make this a Star Fox game." Then bada bing, bada boom, Adventures.
Star Fox Adventures originated here in Kyoto. Personally, I've been working on the series for a long time and I'm quite attached to it. So, I went to Miyamoto like, let me do it. And he replied with, for this game, why not try an adventure-style game instead of a shooting game? And so, Morita and I began toying around with various ideas.
A 2002 interview from Nintendo Dream saw Takaya Imamura detail the development of the next Star Fox game after 64. In it, he details the early development struggles of making a third-person action-adventure with guns. This was right after 64, and at this point console shooters hadn't been figured out yet, compared to their equivalents on PC. Whether it was the first or third-person perspective, or how control schemes at this point ranged from serviceable to downright terrible. When the decision was made to merge the Star Fox project with Dinosaur Planet, compromises had to be made to make the game functional for its planned release in 2002. So the idea of Adventures being an adventure game with guns was scrapped. Regardless of how the results of Adventures turned out, it's clear that the choice to move Star Fox out of the R-Wing and onto the ground didn't come from Rare, nor did it come from Miyamoto dumping a franchise he wasn't interested in onto another company, as this move is often described. Rather, it came from an experiment into a new genre that didn't pan out for Nintendo, and the shift from one console generation to another creating an opportunity for two late N64 projects to be scrapped together into a game for the new console. It's safe to say that when the reception of the game largely left people asking, "Where's the Star Fox in my Star Fox game?" the team realized that whatever came next for the Star Fox franchise had to have a through line with what came before. And what line they would follow next was unclear until a few months before the release of Adventures, when Nintendo approached Namco.
At Nintendo, we are not waiting to act, we are already acting.
Around the same time as the release of the GameCube, Nintendo was in talks with Sega and Namco to help produce hardware for their next generation of arcade cabinets, using the Nintendo GameCube as the base for its development. This arcade board would be titled the Triforce, a name that is far too cool for the mere 14 games developed for the board over its lifetime. It was during this partnership that Miyamoto and Imamura approached Namco to give them a pitch on a new Star Fox game. When they were asked to give a pitch, Namco's team handed them a planning doc for a vehicle-swapping war action game. Miyamoto and Imamura, who had been eyeing a new direction for the Star Fox series for years, saw the vision of a Star Fox game that let you hop in and out of vehicles, and it immediately caught their interest. Now, I want to make it clear that I was not a developer at Namco in 2002. I would have been celebrating my first birthday, so I cannot say where the idea for a vehicle-swapping war action game could have come from. All I can say is that Namco joined the Star Fox project with their pitch in August of 2002, and by sheer coincidence, a vehicle-swapping war action game had taken the world by storm just 9 months prior. Halo Combat Evolved's impact on the gaming industry is oftentimes exaggerated by its fanbase, some even equating it to the second coming of Christ. I wouldn't quite go that far, I'd say it was at least a third or fourth coming. Bungie's debut on the Xbox was a turning point for developers moving into the 21st century. While Halo would not be the first to make an FPS with a robust campaign, engaging enemies, seamless ground-to-vehicle combat, and intensely fun multiplayer, it was the first to put that whole package on a console, with controls that didn't feel like complete ass. It came as no surprise that when Halo exploded onto the scene as it did, developers were quick to pick apart the pieces to implement into their own works. But while the West was especially fast on adapting to what Halo presented, the East was far more hesitant.
The trouble was that first-person shooter games, as opposed to the third-person shooting we went for in Assault, are not very popular in Japan. I myself, at least currently, don't really enjoy them because of how frustrating they can be, so our intention was to make this new Star Fox in a style of game that's acceptable in Japan as well.
Even if Nintendo and Namco completely disregarded the release of Combat Evolved, which I sincerely doubt, the definition of a vehicle-swapping war action game had already been defined a year before development on Assault began in full. This left the project with two major hurdles. One was re-engaging the fans from Star Fox 64 with a more traditional Star Fox game, while also being one of many to, intentionally or not, race to pick up the trail behind Halo's meteoric rise. Whatever the team chose to focus on, they had to execute it flawlessly. Nintendo would reveal the next Star Fox project at E3 2003, featuring a CG trailer and early development footage of Assault. The gameplay of the trailer largely consisted of the Star Fox team fighting each other on a rather empty landscape, showcasing the on-foot combat and swapping between the R-Wing and Landmaster. There's some dogfights and Fox rolling in the dirt and I'm sorry, I understand I have been playing the role of a history teacher for the start of this video, but I must take a moment to say that this trailer is just bad. Articulating how it is bad is a pointless endeavor, because no words I could say would match just listening to it.
All right, Star Fox, full speed ahead.
What does that voice? Putting aside the quality of the trailer, we do learn a lot about the direction of Star Fox from this brief reveal, namely where the team chose to focus their attention. Star Fox Adventures was out, and elements of Star Fox 64 were put back on the forefront. But the element of 64 they decided to focus on was the surprising part. Out of any part of 64 to evolve on, to iterate and to grow into the next generation, the team at Namco decided to evolve the Versus Mode. Versus Mode in Star Fox 64 was an inclusion, a late bonus feature for those that had a sibling come in the room that wanted to play. If you had a couple friends and some controllers, it was a blast to fly around, shoot your friends out of space, or do tank battles on Corneria. But it was always secondary to the main event. So why did Namco decide to focus on the Versus Mode so much? Well, the Versus Mode did have a secret inclusion that you could unlock in the game. If you were able to get through the game on Expert Mode and receive a medal on the planet Venom, you would unlock a new on-foot option in the Versus Mode. This on-foot option was barely anything in 64. But if you wanted to make a vehicle swapping game, it was important to have. They took the bare bones mode that 64 had brought in late to development, added the ability to swap between the 3 gameplay options it offered, and made that the bedrock for the rest of the game.
Midway through, we had devoted all this time and energy, and the battle mode was really great. And it was like, okay, so what are we going to do about that one-player mode? The battle mode being so enjoyable, we were worried that if the story mode was equally great, it would feel really unbalanced.
We did in fact discuss abandoning the one-player mode entirely and making Assault a pure multiplayer battle mode game.
We seriously considered it, no joke.
At the time of the 2003 reveal, the Versus Mode was the only thing that had been developed for the game, with plans to design it similarly to Super Smash Bros., multiplayer being the core of the experience. That mindset of multiplayer first is not uncommon in today's market of live service games, but the standard of the 2000s was single player first, multiplayer bonus. The idea of making a single player focused franchise a multiplayer only game was downright insane. It was only after the response to the initial reveal trailer that the team realized they had to, and I quote, roll up their sleeves and make one. Hello to those who have been passively listening to this section of the video. Welcome back. It is at this point that the video shifts from being a documentary to a proper review. So please make sure to have all your arms, wings, and paws inside the vehicle at all times. It's only going to get bumpy from here. Star Fox Assault's final release compared to the trailer is, thankfully, far better than what they presented at E3. The story mode being the first option front and center is a great sigh of relief for Star Fox fans picking up this game back in 2005, and means we can start our introduction of the game right with a traditional on-rails level. But first, let's address something about the game as a whole. This is not what Assault looks like. This is what Assault looks like. Star Fox Assault is in a 4:3 resolution instead of 16:9, which can't be attributed to age, as even Star Fox Adventures before this had a widescreen option. Namco just decided not to develop the game for widescreen support, a decision that unfortunately makes Assault look incredibly aged even when it first released, despite the impressive visuals it musters. I have decided for the sake of the video to fake a widescreen so we don't have this dead space the entire time, but wanted you to know that this is what the game looks like normally, and if anything in the video starts to look like a wide Putin meme, that's why. Anyways, the opening mission of Fortuna sees the Star Fox team deployed to take down the remnants of Andross's army, led by the former member of Starwolf Andrew Oikini. We get this slick cinematic cutscene at the beginning introducing us to the team, including Fox McCloud, Falco Lombardi, Slippy Toad, and Crystal. I was not expecting Nintendo to be so progressive by transitioning Peppy hair, but I must admit she is rocking the new look. Oh, never mind. What leads from the cinematic is an action-packed run through Oikini's fleet, introducing you to the R-Wing, shooting down enemies, saving Slippy, everything you'd expect from a normal Star Fox level. Halfway through, the mission transitions onto a planet below, weaving through thick forest and wrecking a hidden base to finally confront Andrew himself. I found myself really enjoying this opening level, both for its cinematic flair and how it seeks to bring back the old style of gameplay with a very visually appealing style. There's quite a bit of clever level design in here too. The battle in space is very open, letting new players get used to moving around in the R-Wing and shooting down enemies, while the ground section does the exact opposite, demanding you to navigate its dense areas with careful precision. It's great. One of my favorites in the entire series. Simple, but fun. The gameplay of the R-Wing itself is also very good. It controls well, and I especially enjoy the sharper Gundam look the Namco team decided to give them alongside all the other vehicles in the game. However, while I do enjoy the R-Wing in Assault, I do find it to be somewhat of a downgrade compared to 64. The pace of the levels are surprisingly slow for the speed the R-Wing showcased in the opening. Enemies too move at glacial paces here, even at the highest difficulties. We can chalk up the enemy's speed to it being the opening mission. They do get faster in later levels, but the speed of the R-Wings themselves hardly change. And because of that, it does a terrible job of masking the rails when they turn around corners, which is also a new addition in Assault. I don't find this to be a problem myself, but I can imagine for some this speed could break the immersion the game is trying to achieve. It doesn't feel much like punching through an enemy fleet when you move at the pace of a brisk walk. Despite that gripe, I still thoroughly enjoy the opening mission and the on-rails missions as a whole. They may not be the same bar as 64, but they are very close, and I would expect nothing less from the team behind Ace Combat. And hell, I haven't even mentioned the best part of this mission.
Let me show you my true power! I must bring an end to our relationship! Die!
He's just so much of a little shit. There's just something about this boss fight that I love so much about. His over-the-top voice and arrogant imitation of his uncle's boss fight. The way he taunts you when he gets a hit in, and the tantrum Andrew has when you break one of his arms. It's such an unintentional mockery of his own uncle while also paying homage to a beloved moment from the original games. And it makes the experience of watching this arrogant ape go limp in the arms extremely satisfying. And even as we finish the fight against Andrew, this level still has more to give.
Uncle Andrew!
That doesn't look friendly.
Aperoid, Aperoid, Aperoid.
Aperoid?
There's no time to hesitate. Return fire.
Our second boss fight of the first level showcases us the real threat of the game, the Aperoids, a mysterious alien force of cybernetic bugs invading the Lilat system. Did Namco decide to make their Star Fox game a reference to their own lineage of spaceships shooting down space bugs? Yes, they did. The Aperoid fight is instantly more engaging than Andrew, and defeating the Aperoid immediately shows us an army of that same boss spread across the skies. It's as Star Fox flees from the planet of Fortuna that we realize we're not a team of scrappy mercenaries charging through faceless armies to defeat the big bad. We're now soldiers at the front lines of a very real galactic threat. And with that realization, the first level ends. In 10 minutes of gameplay, Star Fox Assault was able to perfectly iterate on the franchise's core formula, create an incredibly engaging level that every time you think is over, keeps coming back for more, was able to give nods to favorite parts of the series for longtime fans in Oikoni, and subsequently set up the real stakes of the story by blasting him out of existence with a single drone of an invading enemy force. I spent nearly 2 pages of my script discussing the first mission alone purely because I want you to understand just how perfect this level is as a design. It isn't the most difficult level in the series, nor the most mechanically unique, but it serves its role as the opener beautifully. And the fact that it is so perfect is one of the many failings of Star Fox Assault's campaign.
I'll head to the surface immediately. That signal shouldn't be too hard to find.
After Mission 1 completes, the first thing you'll notice different about Assault is how the campaign is structured. There are 10 levels in Assault, compared to 64's 7 levels. Now, me saying 7 there has just raised the brow of every single person watching this video who has played 64, but there's a reason I'm saying that. 64 was unique in that your performance in a given level changed the path you would go through the system on. Second or third playthroughs of 64's story mode would see you play an almost entirely different game from your first playthrough. You play through 7 levels in a given run, but there's 15 total levels to play. Assault may have more levels on an initial run, but it is entirely linear. No amount of performance in a given level will unlock a new direction. you will play the same 10 levels whether it was your first or 15th playthrough. That may sound like I am complaining that the story mode isn't exactly the same as 64, but I don't actually find this to be a problem. While the variety in Star Fox 64 was a treat, the format left a lot to be desired in story and length. There were some story beats to discover like the bonus wingmen or the secret ending, but most individual levels had no functional purpose to the overall narrative. Assault, on the other hand, has a stronger emphasis on narrative. Set nearly a decade after the events of 64, the Star Fox team is noticeably more mature. Fox is less arrogant and has grown to be a wiser, more empathetic leader. Falco is significantly less abrasive and more open to the team. Slippy is still Slippy, but he has a lot more confidence and the willingness to stand up for himself. And Crystal, I'm gonna put a pin on Crystal. I have thoughts on her, but I want to save them till later. Having a more linear narrative with traditional cutscenes and pacing gives Namco and Nintendo the chance to develop these characters and the world a bit better than 64 could. This change did, incidentally, mean that the difficulty for the campaign had to be adjusted. The branching path method that 64 has naturally puts you on harder paths the better you performed, but with no such option available in Assault, they instead go for the traditional difficulty option. These are all pretty bog standard systems for a single player campaign, but I do have to point out a certain similarity in structure with a game we mentioned earlier. We'll get more into that similarity a lot more later on. We now move on to Mission 2, where we see the Star Fox team respond to a distress call on the planet of Katina. Fox decides to land at the abandoned outpost that the distress call is being sent out at, marking our first introduction into the new on-foot gameplay. As Fox enters the outpost and gets ambushed by the Aperoids, we get to see what 8 years of theorizing a future 3D action game for Star Fox really looks like.
Fox, first get rid of the Aperoids in your pack.
I think you can tell from my silence that I am a little disappointed about this opening. There's several layers to these opening moments that get to me. First of which being the controls.
Our biggest worry was how Fox would control when you're playing as him. Initially, we implemented a twin-stick FPS-style control scheme, which is the basic control scheme you see in America. But when we actually played it, as we feared, it was pretty difficult. So we decided to add a one-stick control scheme, which would be more universally intuitive for players.
This is the sentiment of the development team early on into creating Assault, and it is a decision that I don't disagree with on principle. Adding more options for controls is not a bad thing, nor will it ever be. And the fact a twin stick option plus the ability to choose inverted control separately on each vehicle is a good decision. I want to make that clear. It was a good decision. I disagree, however, with making the default control scheme tank controls. When you make a new profile in Star Fox Assault, you are given the option to choose your control scheme, with one stick control scheme being the first option you can choose. If you are new to the game or new to shooter games in general, this is the control scheme you would choose, since you have no idea which one is the better option. Immediately after the quote you just saw, Kobayashi followed it by saying,
The FPS-style twin stick is difficult at first, but once you get used to it, it feels like you could do anything.
They knew ahead of time that the twin stick controls were the better option overall, but out of fear of alienating their casual consumer base, they made the one stick option the first pick. Using one stick controls doesn't completely ruin the experience of playing Star Fox Assault. It is serviceable and capable of completing the game, but your runway with this control scheme is severely limited. Having your movement tied to the same stick you aim your weapon with makes maneuvering these levels extremely clunky. And aiming at anything that isn't in direct eyeline with you is an exercise in frustration. I highly recommend anybody considering playing this game to immediately pick the middle option in the controls menu. The twin sticks are, and forgive me for this one, objectively better at moving, aiming, and having a good time in Assault. And to the game's credits, the pilot gameplay can be a pretty good time. At the start of every pilot mission, you get a blaster with infinite ammo. A blaster that has absolutely zero resemblance to any other gun ever made. It is a fun weapon to fire on its own, with most of the grunt Aperoids able to be killed in 1 or 2 hits. Stronger enemies can be destroyed by charging up the blaster for a more powerful shot, akin to the R-Wing. While I do not particularly like the explosion sounds in Assault since they sound rather crunchy, the fact that every enemy blows up dramatically when killed makes the act of mowing down an entire wave of bugs very enjoyable. The game is also very generous in giving you various ways of mowing down waves of bugs. You get a machine gun, a rocket launcher, a sniper rifle, Gatling gun, grenades, and more. You find these scattered throughout every level with limited ammo, so you'll constantly be swapping between weapons based on your reserve ammo and what the situation demands. When Assault's pilot gameplay is at its best, it's a lot of fun. Not the most engaging shooter gameplay I have seen, but it hits the dopamine receptors. Namco is especially keen on keeping those dopamine receptors active too, since early on into the mission you get a Landmaster, letting you spend the rest of this level mowing down enemies with a tank that can Dark Souls dodge roll. But by the time I reached the Landmaster in this mission, an issue arose once again with the controls. Those button layout options you pick from aren't just for pilot gameplay, they affect the Landmaster as well. If you have twin stick controls as a pilot, you have twin stick controls in the Landmaster. The twin stick controls work fine in the Landmaster, but do make turning a bit awkward, and it just feels odd that I can't use tank controls in the literal tank. All of this leaves me wishing Namco had simply made the game around the twin stick control scheme, and left you options for changing the controls on each vehicle independently. I have to now circle back to the reason the devs chose not to use twin stick controls. If the excuse to not default to them was that they are too difficult, there were two ways they could have solved this. The first would have been to make a tutorial. Even 64 had a basic tutorial to play. Assault just throws you in blind while Peppy occasionally shouts some advice at you. The second way is actually my next problem with the opening of Mission 2. Let me play for you the opening of the level again. This is the player's first introduction to pilot gameplay. The first time pilot gameplay is ever done in a Star Fox game, and it starts with the orchestra at full blast and enemies waiting for you right behind the mission start text. I cannot think of a more jarring way to introduce someone to a new control scheme than this. Or if I could, it was too jarring to remember. It's at this point that we can finally take the time to bring up that other game I keep talking about. Combat Evolved also had the problem of needing to teach a very inexperienced audience how to use their controls. But unlike Assault, which drops you immediately into the action, Halo takes the time to teach you in the opening mission. First with aiming, then with moving. It's only after you get a solid grasp of aiming and moving that Halo hands you an empty pistol and your first enemies to shoot at. Imagine now that people's first ever experience with Combat Evolved didn't start here, but rather at the moment you meet your first grunt. What's even more frustrating about it is that the level could have simply started a little earlier, outside of the outpost, letting the player walk up to the door themselves and shooting a target to open the door. Then you could have the ambush and the mission starts properly. Assault's problems with clunky controls are, in my opinion, entirely self-inflicted. The worst part is, I think I know why they didn't design the mission to accommodate this, and it leads me to talking about problem number 3. Yeah, there's still another problem with the opening. Do you recognize this level? It may not look familiar, but let me jog your memory for a moment.
Gunfighting action.
It's the multiplayer map from the reveal trailer. Katina Outpost is not a level created for the campaign. It's a level designed for the versus mode. You are dropped in the middle of the map because there was never a starting point designed for a mission to kick off from. You could have started here, or here, or here. It doesn't really matter, the result is the same. You can't guide a player through a carefully crafted sequence of objectives when the map lets them go in any direction they want. The objective in Mission 2 is to take down a series of targets around the map. First a group of larger enemies called Dodge, that's their name. Then after you defeat all of them, the next targets quite literally rain down from the sky. Hatchers that spawn more aperoids around them. You then circle the map once again, destroying all of the targets. These objectives are the equivalent of tossing breadcrumbs across the grass and hoping the trail left behind by the bird eating them creates the Mona Lisa. Okay, I have been incredibly critical of this mission, so let me take a moment to give a few positives. The objectives may be incredibly dull when reflected upon, but this setup does give the player more time to acclimate to the controls in an open environment. I also need to take the time now to say that nearly every level in Assault ends with a boss fight, and for the most part, I enjoy all of them. The boss fight at the end of Katina is an aperoid ship with legs. You shoot the glowy bit underneath the giant disc, and then hover up to the top of the boss to blast its core. If you are skilled enough with the Landmaster, you can even stay on top of the boss even when it tries to shake you off. A small amount of skill expression, but a fun amount nonetheless. Now that we have been introduced to the three main parts of Assault's gameplay, the R-Wing, the Landmaster, and the Pilot, I think now is a good time to pause the campaign and take a more thorough look at the multiplayer. Given that the game was built around the versus mode, I wouldn't blame you for thinking that I have taken far too long getting to what is supposed to be the main dish of Assault. The only reason it took this long is that trying to schedule a group of friends to spend a night playing Star Fox Assault on the GameCube is a lot harder to do at 25 than it was when I was 10. From our brief exploration of the Katina mission so far, we have a strong understanding of Assault's theme in the shooter genre, that being a sandbox shooter. A style that has players drop on an open-ended map, gather tools around said map, and use them to destroy the ever-loving shit out of your friends. If you grew up with Quake, or Doom, or well, Halo, you know exactly what to expect here. The major differences being the third-person perspective and, of course, the focus on vehicles. The biggest difference with vehicles in Assault compared to other games is how much they feel like an extension of your character rather than an additional bonus that you can have. And of course, the on-foot gameplay is balanced by how often you can avoid being targeted by the larger vehicles, and having access to power weapons just as capable of taking them down as any other vehicle could. Some of the more enjoyable moments of versus mode came from the back and forth chases we would have as one person in the lobby became public enemy number 1, constantly dodging from danger as multiple red lock-ons would appear on the screen. I don't think any of the game modes are particularly standout, most of it is just generally deathmatch, but there are some fun modes like snipers only or rockets only that change up how you can play. One thing that I think doesn't translate well from the multiplayer to a video is how not chaotic it can feel in the moment. When you're watching this on YouTube right now, I imagine it's hard to track what is going on, but oftentimes it's a lot easier to do when you're focused on one corner of the screen, and it's very easy to tell who's who based on the strong colors that mark each player on the screen. The Star Fox cast have some noticeably distinct designs compared to their previous entries, each having a unique costume with a different solid color. That's because their outfits were also designed for the multiplayer, each having a strong color to differentiate them on a small screen. It's never difficult to find out which character you are on screen and track the action as it's going on, since your chosen character's outfit has the colors swapped to the slot your controller is in. But the palette swaps do make for some unfortunate combinations. One friend of mine only wanted to play Crystal and was in slot 3. Which made her wear this rather ugly yellow during our entire session. It's a sacrifice made for visual clarity, but I would have liked more options to change colors, especially in a free-for-all game mode. You'd expect at this point for me to take the versus mode and compare it to the Halo multiplayer a bit more, a comparison that I have done plenty in this video and will continue to do. The nature of versus mode, however, is less akin to Halo and more to Super Smash Bros. Combat Evolved does not ask anything of the player to be able to play with all the maps, weapons, and vehicles in the game, but Assault locks characters, weapons, and entire levels to achievements and playtime, incentivizing you to keep playing to unlock everything, much like how you would unlock a character in Smash Bros. What I find interesting and somewhat insane about these unlocks, however, are the requirements. The two other characters you can unlock, Wolf and Peppy, have pretty simple requirements. For Wolf, you have to complete the story mode with no squad mate getting taken down, and for Peppy, you have to play 15 total matches of versus mode. Overall, pretty reasonable things to ask for from a player. But what is crazy to ask for is 150 games of versus mode played to unlock the Wolfen, or to unlock the unique stages Titania Desert and Zone S Sea Base, while the remaining simple stages to unlock, Map 4 and Map 5, require a total of 260 games played. I do enjoy the fact that continually playing the game unlocks new toys for you to play with, but at the same time, I find it really frustrating that to be able to play with things like the cluster bombs, predator rockets, or booster packs, I have to play over 200 games. And as you can tell from the fact that I'm using other people's footage in this video, credit in the bottom corner, I didn't even unlock all of them for this video. As a sandbox shooter, it is a lot of fun, but in the ways a party game with friends can be fun for a few hours, not in a way that encourages players to dive deeper. And I believe that's partly because Assault doesn't actually utilize its sandbox very well. The biggest maps designed for all vehicle types are a bit interesting to me since, in my experience with them, they all congregate in the same areas on each map, and don't take advantage of the larger space around them. Ficina's map in particular has all of the action happening around this central building and the little outdoor space around it. That is despite all of this terrain out here to play around. Players will repeatedly spawn close by instead of the game utilizing the entire area. Even vehicles will all spawn around these central locations. This encourages you not to utilize the entire sandbox, but instead circle the same spot on the map with the same vehicle and weapon spawns, rendering most of the toys you can play with irrelevant. It's a very weird quirk of the decisions made by the dev team, and makes me wonder what all of this extra area was supposed to be used for. I also keep getting this strange sense of familiarity with these maps, like I've played on them before. Like every single one of them was in the campaign.
Oh no! He's in serious.
It is here that I would like to remind listeners that the video you are watching is not simply a review of Star Fox Assault. It is an autopsy, a thorough examination of a metaphorical dead thing to determine the cause of which that death took place. As our goal is to understand the passing of this game, it is important to emphasize that what I am about to discuss is not the cause of death of Assault. It is, however, the gaping wound at the center. My revisit to the campaign came at the complete horror of realizing that every single pilot section in the story mode is a multiplayer map. Or maybe they were campaign maps first? I'm not sure. And that's somewhat terrifying. Of the 10 missions available in Assault, 6 of them are pilot missions, 7 of them are multiplayer maps, and only 3 are on-rails missions. When we talked earlier about how Assault started as a multiplayer-only game, these are the consequences of that decision.
In a normal development, you would work on a battle mode on the side while you're creating the main game. And what often happens then is that you run out of time. And despite your best intentions, you have to abandon modes you wanted to include. But this time, we made a really solid battle mode first, then pivoted to the single player, which we determined to make as good as the battle mode.
Namco spent most of their development time working on their multiplayer game mode, and when you are that deep into development, it becomes hard to invest more time, money, and energy into a complete single-player experience. I cannot say for certain how many of these levels started as multiplayer maps or which ones came after single-player. But what I can say is that all of the maps were designed to be used for both multiplayer and single player with few differences made to them. To save on development costs or boost the number of maps available? I don't know. What results for us are missions that blend together into a mush of spawning in the middle of the map and wandering around to destroy targets. Hatchers, dodges, teleporters, living radar jammers, you name it. Namco made it a target and scattered them throughout a multiplayer map. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with reusing a campaign or multiplayer map for use in another mode. Plenty of games do this, and yes, even Halo does it too. Reach rather infamously featured a map in nearly every campaign level that got reused for the multiplayer. The issue with almost all of them is that when you play on a map whose purpose is for a different game mode, they often stick out like sore thumbs in how they got reused. Once you see a multiplayer map pop up in Halo Reach, you can't help but see how awkwardly they fit with the rest of the level design. For Assault, it's not just one part of a level that's being reused, it's the entire level, and the levels not being designed for the campaign are as clear as day. Mission 3's Sargosa Station is normally a small indoor level in Versus mode, but in the campaign it needs to open up to a wider space to fit with the Star Wolf fight that is this mission's boss battle. Namco had to find a way to incorporate both the outdoor and indoor areas into one unit, and the way they do so is about as shoehorned as you could make it. The Might Gauge. This bar, up in the corner, is the amount of enemies currently in the air fighting your squad mates. This bar will rise as you go through the mission, and the only way to lower it is by taking down the enemies in the R-Wing. On paper, I like this mechanic. It breaks up the pilot gameplay and lets players pilot the one vehicle most people are coming here for. But in practice, this system is another band-aid solution to the multiplayer map problem. The objective for Mission 2 is to destroy teleporters inside the station, and these teleporters go from the bottom of the station you start at all the way to an enclosed area at the very top. It's a climb to get to the height, and the level is designed to challenge you more as you climb up. The problem is that the R-Wing is at the bottom of the station. If the Might Gauge reaches a point where it demands you clear the enemies, you have to stop your climb, jump to the bottom, destroy the enemy ships, then get back in the station and start the climb over again. Even worse, this is a mission where Slippy is joining you on the ground, and even though he doesn't do that much on the ground, you could have had his R-Wing somewhere higher up so that we had an option to fly through without losing any progress. Instead, what is supposed to be a way of breaking up pilot gameplay is at its best a chore ruining the pace of the level. There is one other mission to feature the Might Gauge, and it showcases this problem wonderfully. Mission 6, on Saria, has you clear targets around the map while managing the Might Gauge. Saria is chock full of separate elevations you have to scale. Often, you will get into a vehicle, reach a higher level with it, then accidentally fall down from the height. And when you need to get back into the air to clear the Might Gauge, you can bet your ass the R-Wing will be above you. That's without mentioning just how limited the area is for aerial combat. Enemy ships are crammed together in what feels like a fishbowl rather than an open sky, making the R-Wing a claustrophobic experience to use here. Saria is also one of 2 levels without a dedicated boss fight. Not that I think they could fit one. And now, I have to use Halo again to show you how it should have been done. Vehicles in Combat Evolved are mixed in throughout each mission, with a lot more variety to choose from compared to Assault 2. I will not be comparing the vehicles directly as they serve very different purposes between each game, but I will show you how you gain access to them. When you first crash land onto the Halo ring, you walk through the valley on foot, seeing enemy vehicles flying overhead. You then reach a group of survivors from the crash onto the ring and help them take down waves of the Covenant. At the end of this battle, a Pelican comes in and drops a Warthog that you can drive through the rest of the level. This is important. You do not receive a Warthog until it is necessary for the mission. Everything following the dropping of the Warthog is designed specifically for driving the Warthog through it. This is consistent with every other level in the game. If a vehicle is introduced, the mission is designed around highlighting that vehicle's strengths, whether that be Warthogs, tanks, or Banshees. This is different from, say, Blood Gulch, where the map is designed to account for all possible vehicles available on the map. If we were to make Blood Gulch replace the mission we just showcased, the on-foot gameplay would feel terrible since you're just wandering around a giant open map, but you constantly have to come back to your fleet of vehicles staying at the center of the map because there's some flying grunts in the air you have to take care of with a Banshee. Do you see where one level design helps highlight the best parts of the gameplay and one doesn't? The worst part of all these decisions for the missions, how they're laid out, and how you engage with them is that they have the unintended effect of also damaging the game's story. And yes, that is going to be my transition into talking about...
This is my final request. Destroy this ship. Destroy me.
As I showed earlier, I had hopes that the story in Assault would be a more developed narrative compared to Star Fox 64, now that we have moved to a more linear story path. The reality of that hope is... yes, there is significantly more story, but that does not make Assault a narrative worth dissecting. The Aperoid invasion plays a very minimal role on the narrative in the first half of the game, only to be on the verge of assimilating the entire system between a single mission. It is laughable watching the mo-capped Fox McCloud hold his head in shame as General Pepper tells him the Cornerian army has been destroyed. Off-screen. While Assault's storyline tries its best to showcase an engaging, heroic journey through the Lylat system, as well as the horrors the Aperoids bring to it, every beat that Assault tries to hit is constrained by the levels that it has to be the bridge between. And some of those bridges are not done very well, such as the Saria mission we talked about earlier. In the middle of the plot progressing, Crystal just magically gets a distress call from Saria, and now we have to go to Saria to save the dinosaurs. Screw you, Tricky, you big piece of... The credit I will give Assault's storyline, though, is that it did something I never expected a licensed Nintendo property to ever do. Brutally killing a main cast member. That's not hyperbole, that's Pigma. Spending the first half of the story chasing Pigma Dengar for the MacGuffin he stole in Mission 2 feels like a lot of padding early on, but pays off in Mission 5, the Asteroid Field, our second on-rails mission and the battleground for our final confrontation with Pigma. What was expected coming in was a fight similar to the Starwolf battle in Mission 3, but what we get is a far more horrifying result.
Pigma!
Holy shit. I mean it when I say that this moment in the story mode made the young Moore, playing Assault for the first time, put the game down for several days after seeing Pigma horrifically turned into an Aperoid. And it is the moment today where I felt I may have written off the story for the game a bit too early. That feeling lasted for one mission, but it was there. They try the same shtick they did with Pigma by making the boss fight of Mission 7 an Aperoid form of General Pepper. This is a rather disturbing fight to have because General Pepper will actively call for his death in the middle of the fight to the Star Fox team. This is a Nintendo story that has a main character currently begging to be killed, and I am sure this moment would hit a bit more if two things had been done differently. The fight is done over the same multiplayer map on Corneria you've been seeing throughout the video, a turret section that circles the same space again and again and again as you hold the fire button towards Pepper. Not only is it an uninteresting fight visually, but it is a boss fight that can be done one-handed. Not very exciting for what is the execution of a beloved character. The other problem with this moment that ruins it is that General Pepper is saved by Peppy. You can tell from the ending of this mission that Namco and Nintendo felt it was okay for the evil, ugly, nasty Pigma to be brutally turned into a monster. But dear old Pepper is just trapped in his corrupted Gundam and needs help getting out. The few teeth that the story had were done for the shock value from that initial reveal. Everything else going forward is your bog standard heroic journey, including another sacrificial moment by Peppy at the Aperoid homeworld. He lives, by the way. It is, at best, a decent story that bridges the gap between story missions well enough, and by itself that can be plenty of fun. While I could sit here and whine, I don't think anybody expected a masterpiece of storytelling from Star Fox, of all places. And shooter campaigns largely follow this same formula anyways. What is disappointing is that outside of the things I have mentioned so far, there's very few set pieces in the story that really stand out outside of the boss fights. And the Star Fox team as a whole have very few moments in the game where they get to really shine. And they really needed to shine. I don't dislike any of the performances of our main cast, but their characters leave a lot to be desired outside of Fox, and no one showcases this better than Crystal. Crystal, as the new addition from Star Fox Adventures, was effectively being given her debut in Assault. A chance to showcase her character since the game she came from largely left her as a damsel in distress.
The team was split into two camps, those who wanted her to occupy a motherly role and those who wanted her to be more like a big sister. We actually had this problem on the adventure development too, where her personality was too vague and it caused tons of confusion amongst the team.
The only two moments where Crystal feels like she's getting some form of characterization are in the first mission and a small amount in the Ficina mission. Much like everything else in Fortuna, Crystal has a very good moment here.
Here we go!
I enjoy the excitement she has coming into frame.
Hey, that's mine!
But the second moment on Ficina is not quite as good.
Just get rid of that blizzard, will ya? You all need to stop being so awfully selfish. I know your visibility's poor, but aim for the towers.
This is the only clip I could find of Crystal being motherly, or big sisterly, either or, honestly. It's in a voice line that can be easily missed during the moment-to-moment gameplay, a Borderlands style of dialogue that does not work for great characterization. The only other thing she gets outside of this is her role in the Saria mission, which is mostly used to insinuate a relationship between her and Fox. And you want to know the best part of all of this? The reason Slippy, Crystal, and Falco don't have dedicated moments to develop their characters is because the campaign wasn't tailored for that. It was tailored to recycle the multiplayer.
Slayer.
When I say that everything leads back to the decision to recycle the campaign and multiplayer levels, I mean everything. It is a problem that compounds on itself, with tiny issues piling up with each individual decision made by the dev team. The story, the multiplayer, and the campaign all fall short of what they could potentially have been because everything had to be blended together. A sandbox shooter is defined by the tools it offers the player, but it is not remembered for them.
Boo.
A sandbox game of any merit knows how to take the toys it leaves in the sand and create truly breathtaking scenarios to play with them in. And this is what I would call the cause of death for Assault as a game. It is a sandbox that quite literally leaves everything out on the sand, and leaves it for you to play with them. It will change the sandbox and may even take you on a bit of a cart ride, but it will never reach further from that. Assault never seeks to be more than its sandbox, never reaches for greater heights, and despite being one of the most ambitious leaps for a Nintendo franchise, plays it as safe as they possibly could. The statement I made at the start of this video was, the time Nintendo made a Halo game. That title is, admittedly, clickbait. You've already seen the differences. However, a small change in the wording will showcase the true meaning of this video. The title is not, That Time Nintendo Made a Halo Game, it is, That Time Nintendo Incidentally Made a Halo Game. As I said far earlier, there is no possible way for me to stand here and say that Namco fully intended to make a game that related to Halo in any way whatsoever. The vehicle-swapping war action game could have been anything, but unintentionally or not, the end product of Star Fox Assault bears a similar presence in the gaming ecosphere as Combat Evolved. If we get into the nitty-gritty of each game's mechanics, the similarities shatter. But if you are a consumer looking for a shooter game to play, only one difference between these two games matter: the execution. And this is where Assault squanders. Let me take a moment to say I'm not actually that big of a fan of Combat Evolved's campaign. It was revolutionary for its time, but on revisit has aged very poorly.
You did that on purpose, didn't you?
Several of the missions reuse the same corridors and layouts, and even areas that aren't the exact same drag on for far too long than they should. I am not even going to get into the library in this video. That is a gigantic can of worms left for another time. I may not be a fan of CE's campaign, but what I recognize about it is how well it executes on its core gameplay, introducing each part incrementally while providing the right level design in moments when new weapons, vehicles, or mechanics are introduced. If Combat Evolved is anything, it is a fantastic example of how to bring a new audience into an unfamiliar genre. But on the other side of the coin, we have Assault, which introduces you with a familiar formula, then sends you flying headfirst into the unfamiliar, never properly highlighting the strengths of the new genre they're jumping into, with controls that are clunkier than they should for 2005, and core gameplay that has been recycled to the point where mechanics introduced have to mask their greatest weaknesses. It is a game that rides on the twist it brings to the Star Fox formula, that being the Versus mode. And at its very best, Versus mode is a great experience, but therein lies the problem. This was a multiplayer game as good as Halo Combat Evolved's multiplayer, after that game had already been usurped by Halo 2. The online multiplayer functionality of Halo 2 had once again revolutionized console gaming, months before Star Fox caught up with its first installment. No matter what Namco or Nintendo did to push the multiplayer for Assault, it was always going to have the problem of being Halo for the GameCube. And if you were looking to have a Halo experience, you wouldn't have a GameCube in the first place. If I timed the production of this video correctly, it should release just before or on the day the new Star Fox for Nintendo Switch 2 releases. Editing me can confirm whether I succeeded. As this video was worked on before the release of the game, I have no idea if we are about to enter a new era of Star Fox games or if it will be a repeat of Star Fox Zero. But if it happens to be the former, I'd like to make a request. Nintendo, please revisit Star Fox Assault. I have hammered the same point home about how the decision to recycle the campaign and multiplayer damaged every element of the gameplay, story, and sandbox. But I want you now to imagine a world in which they didn't make that decision, where the campaign didn't need to conform to the level design of a multiplayer map, with levels created to highlight specific parts of the experience. A story that had time to explore their characters, build up set pieces, and pay them off in more satisfying ways. I ask you to imagine this because as I played Assault, I felt brief glimpses of this alternate path, where moments in the gameplay clicked, where the right tool at the right moment made for an amazing experience. These moments were fleeting, but when I felt them, I saw a world where Nintendo didn't incidentally make a Halo game. I saw one where they did make a Halo game, one that would have been worth remembering.